we'll go on to another reoccurring theme, which is the social construct. So the Murder Girls series, they in some ways unveil some of the hypocrisies of society and some of the angst that teenagers might experience. That transition between child to adult, where one mentally frees oneself and wants to get separated from one's maternal or paternal bond, and increasingly find yourself as an equal to your parent or develop your own kind of independence. We see that also specifically play out from girlhood to womanhood, where there's this growing aware of the potential of sexuality, of in terms of power, pleasure, or attraction. And when we got to hearing about Gran Fury and the Murder Girls, we actually learned that one of the members had given you a novel about such a story and thought that this would really grip you. And for us, it was fascinating to hear the whole process and the whole research behind that, like going to the library, having a research assistant, going through those newspaper clippings. So we wanted to kind of understand what compelled you to do the work and whether it's something that you would go into today, or is it absolutely a closed chapter?
Oh, there's so many questions there. I'm just going to answer the last question first about, like, is it a closed chapter? Originally, when I started doing this series, I had sort of made this artificial construct for myself that this would be an ongoing series, and that I could carry on as long as I wanted. The only kind of rule was that the cases I was investigating had to be during my lifetime. So basically, I had set up a situation where I could continue this until I died. I did not realize in 1994, when I started the project, how radically the world was going to shift. And those works were created to be seen in a very rarefied situation. Those, you know, back in the day, I was very, very clear about, I make work in the public realm, like Gran Fury, or work I did with Donald Moffat as Bureau. I make, or my own work, which was sometimes put out into the public realm. I make work inside an art gallery or a museum or some other rarefied situation where there's a particular history, background, education, whatever, which could be looked at as very elitist these days. But it was very clear to me that that was the context those pieces were to be read within. I am still today, I do not post that work on social media. It gets posted occasionally, but it is not me posting it. That is not, it becomes prurient, it becomes sensational, it loses the contemplative environment. It doesn't have the background stories with them, which I'm actually letting go of, but this is not work that was made to be disseminated by the millions, because it totally shifts the way that artwork itself works. So for that reason, I'm probably not going to do any more of these. But now I can work backwards into that deeper question. We'll go back historically. Yes, you're right. It was Tom Kalin who got me to read Bad Blood from Richard Levine, which was the story of the Marin County murder, family murder. I actually, Tom Kalin, Gran Fury member, who also is a film director, he directed the queer classic called Swoon. He's now working on PBS documentary of sort of gay and lesbian history. But he wrote a gallery text for my 1993 exhibition at Metro Pictures, which I'll talk about that work in just a minute. But within that brochure, that text, he had a paragraph where he sort of likened my activity around making art, my use of like the forbidden, to the act of Marlene Olive destroying her family. But that wasn't the work I was making then. I was making big text paintings, which were monumental in size. They were based on found language. I didn't make up any of the language. And I was really thinking about the ideas of power, because it's still a struggle in the art world, but it was really an enormous struggle as a young female artist to kind of find your way into the art world. And then to have your artwork thought about as artwork and not just a female statement. So I was thinking about power a lot, especially power within the art world. That really fascinated me. I guess what really fascinated me was that men so readily eased into that power, and women had to fight so hard to get a little bit. From 1988 to 1994, I painted by ironing these hand-drawn text onto raw canvas with a material that was actually used for making t-shirts. So even the act of making these things was sort of a statement. It was symbolic. At that point in time, as I've mentioned, painting was definitely a male-dominated field. We're talking the late 80s and early 90s. My paintings actually sort of became signifiers of paintings that tried to toy with this power. Like, what does it mean to put this like very brazen language from a female into this arena that is usually dominated by the big boys? I guess I was trying to sort of symbolically wield power. Actually, I have that. I'm going backwards now because we were talking about Tom Kalin. I actually have that quote, and I'm going to read it to you. This is what he wrote while I was making the text paintings. So he's referring to the text paintings. Marlene was tired of dependency upon reflexive critique and thus dependency upon the master, the oppressor. Marlene became enraged that her gestures were seen as a perpetual irony, an endless and repetitive imitation of the privilege that is attached to a dick. And one day, finished with the tract houses, the curfews and surveillance, the unwanted competition with mother, and the coquetry with father, Marlene Olive abandoned fantasy for murder. Swapping banal rage for symbolic freedom, she killed both parents. That's Marlene Olive, June 1975. So after he used this quote in the brochure about the text paintings, that's when I was like, maybe I should read that book. So I did. But in a weird way, Tom's words actually presaged what was kind of happening within my own art making process and career. Upon reading the book, I was struck by this example of taking hold of power in an effort of what one envisioned freedom might look like. It was a fight. These struggles of these girls were fights for liberation.
Mm-hmm.
Male, as you all mentioned, male separation from the familial, the mother, was expected. But the pathways, I'm talking early 90s, the pathways for females to separate and self-actuate were much narrower. For me, this case of Marlene Olive is emblematic. In a murder where a male commits violence toward a female, the power imbalance reflects what we expect in society. When females in a relationship, stereotypical of a good family, murder one or the other, the power flux is then called into question. Its meaning becomes unmoored, and other meanings reveal themselves. From my standpoint, after reading Bad Blood, I had this immense feeling that this must happen more than we think it does. I just realized this can't be the only instance. So I decided to do my own research to see what I could find out. And now we enter into the saga you were talking about. The search was its own kind of crazy saga, because at that point in time, murderous violence occurring between two females was extremely rare. 8% of all murders were committed by women. Of that 8%, the vast majority, I don't remember the exact number right here, but it was big, like 95%. 95% of that 8% was in self-defense. We all understand self-defense, and self-defense does not unmoor our societal underpinnings. So I started to look around. You have to realize there was no internet. I had to go to libraries and read books, look through old newspapers, magazines, see if I could dig up any cases, which, by the way, also did not mention the girls by name, because at that point in time, people were actually very careful and very respectful of minors. Minors' identities, minors who were involved in serious crimes, their identities were kept secret. But I could find clues. I found clues. And then I had to call local libraries. I had to call like these ladies in Linville, Virginia, and be like, they'd be like, hello. And I was like, hi. And I always said I was calling, at that point I was teaching at Cooper Union. So I was like, hi, I'm a professor at Cooper Union, and I'm researching a murder case that I think happened in your vicinity around whatever year. And we would kind of piece together what it might have been. And then they would go into their files and send me, if it had occurred there. There were some where they were like, I don't know what you're talking about. But then they would send me Xeroxes that they made from prints of their microfiche. Wow. Do you all even know what microfiche is?
No.
Microfiche is like this tiny little film. They would shoot everything. That's how newspapers would document everything. They would take literally, they'd put their newspaper on a copy stand and they would shoot onto this tiny film negative.
Oh, wow.
And then they would have to blow that up to give you a print. So anyway, I also had to hire an assistant because it was just so massive, minute research that just kind of, you never made a huge progress. It was always like inch by inch by inch. Anyway, long story short, I did sense there were more cases out there, and I found 42 cases. I tried very hard to the best of my ability because sometimes there was very little information, and I also limited myself entirely to using information in the public realm because I did not want to get into all those kind of lawsuit situations of breaking rules of privacy. So following that information to the best of my ability, I tried to choose girls, young women, adolescents who were not insane. They weren't suffering from acute mental health issues or ravenous drug addicts who were driven by, you know, drug use issues. So I tried to pick situations where it came from more unexpected conditions. And as I mentioned, this was not made for the internet. And I was very clear about keeping it really in a tight environment because the work is very heavy. It's very Shakespearean. It's very serious, which is why these drawings became so big, because it's big, it's monumental, and it's at the basis of like how we as females function in this society. It opens up this formative part that has always been a little, or at that point had always been swept under the rugs a bit. I mean, female standing in the world, it has changed a lot since then, but it also has stayed the same. So I'm not even quite sure how that works. But anyway, that's why the drawings became enormous.
It was good now to hear a bit about that kind of, that rarefiedness, that specificity that you were perhaps, that shows the intention, whereas it perhaps was not so democratic, that you had really imagined it for a specific place. And
No,
that,
which
like
is
a larger reading. And which kind of brings me to the next question, which I was thinking about the Le Guin's idea of the carrier bag of fiction, and your narratives in the case of the murder girls, but also perhaps in the primate series. There's some kind of, they lie kind of somewhere in between. There is this, in my opinion, there's this aspect where you counter this kind of grand heroic narrative of man rejoicing over his discoveries, his defeats, his family, but yet at the same time there's also this kind of story linked to the woman that is often tied to ideas of violence and conflict and like strong intensity. So it seems like you try and entice us with this the killing story, but as you just mentioned, it's not intended as that. It's not that in that kind of largely very sensationalist way.
No, I was that actually in the. That's why I'm not really. That's why the work is changing, because the world has changed, and the readings, the issues of like privacy and intimacy are kind of exploded in a way that I, at that point in time, did not anticipate. These works, I always envisioned them as very intimate works. I know, given where the art world is at today, at least in the United States, that's kind of a weird place to be, because now the art world is so much about opening up to all of these forgotten histories of art, forgotten artists. The art world itself is grappling with its own sort of rarefied and elitist position, and you know, those that is being opened up in a way that was not in 1993 or 4. But back to the killer story. I always have a little trouble when people, I have a lot of trouble when they're like, the murder girls often get categorized in a split second by somebody who's seen like 4 Instagram posts, you know, as like, it's about victims, it's about these poor girls, da, da, da. It's not. These are not victims. I mean, ultimately, yes, they're victims of society, as we all are, but it was really work that was trying to respond to deeper things, that more than the sensational TV show, killer show. I actually have had TV shows try to contact me to talk about a couple of these cases, and I've refused. I'm just like, I'm not doing that. That's not what I'm doing. Yeah. So anyway, I do have a lot of trouble, even as you move into the primate work. People tend to box that in really quickly as like, oh, it's about the victim and tragedy, but I see all of this work as pathways to new formation, to reformation. And maybe that pathway isn't always so beautiful.
Perhaps it's the question that we have now, it's a little bit broader in the sense of like a kind of more moral behavior, in that sense, like a big question of morality. Because even though the Murder Girl series or the Crime series not necessarily are coming from like a moral standpoint, there is still a reading that could lead to that kind of, not boxing, but somehow a way of like looking at them in terms of the acts themselves in the Murder Girl series, and oftentimes also in the ways in which, you know, the primates would lead their research with regards to the, you know, the primates. So the morality question comes from this kind of twofold ways in which morality could be seen. So both in its, one could describe it in descriptive form. So, you know, there's like this like set of rules that society gives us and then we have to follow, or normative. So this idea of us, or this kind of more universal, one could say, or uniformity set of like codes of behavior that as humans we tend to adhere to almost naturally. With that regard, what I find interesting is the power of free choice. So I'm going back into some kind of philosophy class and what I'm interested in, but like Kant saying, as a base of morality, what is the base of morality is this notion of being able to freely choose what your then behavior is, leaning towards, you know, whatever direction you're kind of taking. So, and that led me to think to something which is, of course, kind of like racial, and also, you know, like historically Hannah Arendt and the idea of the banality of evil, or this sense of like, or this bigger usage of the word evil, also when it comes to political sense or also activist sense. So the question has to do what your take on morality, and whether that had, when you were working on the Murder Girl series, whether there was some kind of thinking on this subject, whether ever kind of,
well, first I have to excuse myself, Arianna. I am not a philosopher, and I am only mildly read as a interested artist. So I cannot answer your questions quoting philosophers. But I love the fact that you can, and you can maybe contextualize for me. But yes, this idea of morality has always been at the forefront of that work. It took a long time for that work to be able to be kind of absorbed into an art environment. I would like to give a shout out to Annette Schindler from the Swiss Institute at that point of time, to Colin DeLand from American Fine Arts, and to Bronwyn Keenan, who ran Bronwyn Keenan Gallery. Those three people were the only and first people to be brave enough to show that work. And then it kind of grew from there. But people would, I had 33 studio visits from gallery people, curators, art critics. People would come in and be like, oh my God, this is so intense. They were like, this is an amazing show. But in the case of curators and gallery people, they were like, but not for me. And I was just like, well, okay, it's really important for me to do this work, and I'm just going to keep doing it. And if I die, maybe somebody will take it seriously. So that's all to say that I knew from the very beginning that sort of like the moral ambiguity of this work was difficult. It was difficult. It is difficult, but it's meant to be difficult.
Exactly.
And I had also come from a number of years of working in a really didactic art form with Gran Fury, where it was really about telling people the right thing to do, the right way to behave, giving them action items, what they could do. And I just felt like that was not what I was doing in this more closed arena of art contemplation. And I became very clear that I was not going to answer the questions, the moral question for the viewer. The moral question was going to be left to the viewer to figure out. And so I stepped back. I laid the case out for them. And then whether they wanted to approach it superficially as like, it's a murder, or contemplatively, like actually starting to think about like, what are all the parameters that society sets up that causes something like this to happen? And I mean, I'll be very honest with you. I had done an interview with The Believer about this work, and it got taken out of the issue right when it was going to press, because board members read the issue. And in the interview, I had said something to the effect of, I think the struggles that these girls were fighting with, I think those struggles are not foreign to the vast majority of us. The vast majority of us feel that struggle at some point, or have felt that struggle at some point, but we don't cross that boundary. That goes back to maybe some of what Arianna was talking about those like universal bounds of morality. So the fact that I said, I think that we're so closely twined with the issues that were driving this murderous attitude, The Believer went crazy and was like, we can't publish that. We have teenagers who read this. And so, you know, I'm just trying to really go places where we don't comfortably always go.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's part of art's job.
Yeah.
I feel like part of art's job and its power is to guide us or lead us or push us or whatever to a place that we're not used to being. Because when you get there, that's when you start thinking, and that's when a little bit of change happens, one way or another.
Yeah.
So I think I probably skirted your whole idea on moral conduct, but
no, not at all. Just really slightly related is the fact that oftentimes your drawings come with a text that you write. And for the Murder Girls, some of those texts were about, pastimes and then what they were interested in, or like a story, even like for the Trimate series. What was the kind of incipit idea for having those kind of like text as addendum to the work?
For having those narratives, that was really
Somehow.
a bad, nasty thing to do in the art world. That was part of the reason I did it.
Okay.
Was because I knew I wasn't supposed to. But also I did want to give contextualization to the drawings, because if you didn't know anything, you just see basically a teenage girl with see-through clothes. And I felt like it needed a little bit of guidance to what was actually going on there, because girl and women's bodies are so easily consumed. They're so easily consumed by viewers as visual titillation, pornography, whatever. And so it was a bit of an attempt to pull back from that, which probably begs the question of like, why were the girls so, why was their breast and genitals so exposed? Which was also a very conscious decision on my part, because these were all adolescents. All 42 of those cases were adolescents. So all of these women were undergoing the transition from being a child with very little societal enforcement upon your, well, that's not really true. There's actually a lot of childhood gender predication, but it was basically from going, the expectations for the girls or women were changing from childhood to being a young woman. And it was about their sexual development. It was also about them taking on this societal sexual currency. Often at times their mothers were losing it, becoming older, going through menopause, whatever. So the physical body is a very important vehicle of language in this work.
Fun fact, actually Annette Schindler came to see the show here, and we got to know that she actually has one of the Murder Girl drawings, and I asked her whether she had it in her personal space, and they see it with her family every day. So such a strong piece that she's living with on her every day. I was stunned, but at the same time also happy that could take place.
Yeah, she was brave. She is brave.
So on this note of like, what do you call it? Like being brave? Bravery. I was getting stuck with my tongue on my bravery. Yeah, what I wanted to say is like something that comes more from a personal point of view. I feel like, be it the size, the subject matter, the way they're drawn, I feel a strong sense of strength and tenacity and empowerment. And also it has to do with the fact that a lot of the subject matters that are embedded in the works comes from either, subversive strikes on art historical canon, be it, the machisms of, I don't know, Michelangelo or Solerit and all these kind of minimalist painters. Or also this kind of criticality on religious fundamentalism. And when it comes to the murder girls, oftentimes they were coming from, I always forget, evangelicals.
Yeah.
But also the female gaze, the empowerment of such, such look and what it really means symbolically. But also when it comes to then the plants who are then present in the works that we have here, this idea of care as a potential way of kind of subverting the usual response to social injustice. So what I'm also referring now, it's the two large-scale drawings that they're over there, you see, and whether you can maybe quickly go through them, starting from the titles, or which are very interesting, I find. So just a little bit.
Yeah, let me see, do I have the title? I have to read the titles.
Yeah.
I can't memorize them. Hang on, let me see if I've got them. Okay. So I'm showing you guys know there's two pictures, one with a cowboy hat and one without, yeah. Right? The one with the cowboy hat is called Spare Tire, Sputter, Slinger, Spurt, Chaseberry, Monk's Pepper, Yehaw, and it's from 2019. I can, let's see here. Let's see. Okay. I'll walk you through what some of that means, because a lot of it is slang. Spare tire is either the spare tire in the back of your car if you're running, if you get a flat tire, but it's also what you call the fat around one's waist. Sputter is to spit or squirt from the mouth with explosive sounds, or to burn in an uneven way. A spotter in S&M practices is also called a sputter. Slinger. Slinger is a drug dealer or someone who subscribes to Sling TV or an erect penis. Spurt means to gush out in a sudden and forceful stream. Chaseberry and Monk's Pepper are two names for Vitex agnus. It's a plant, it's a bush. And it's basically used by, it has been for centuries, used by monks to induce impotence. It can possibly be calming to toxic masculinity. Yehaw is an expression of enthusiasm or exuberance, typically associated with cowboys or rural inhabitants of the southern US. Just for context, I grew up in Kentucky, which likes to think of itself as a southern state. The other one, the other drawing that's you guys have, does not have a cowboy hat, but has twined fingers, lots of twined fingers. That one is called, let me look for that one again. That one is called, I'll just read it first. Invocation, Mutton. I can't say this word. Escutcheon with Chevron, Rosary P, body odor, benediction, and all the good they do. In this case, invocation is an incantation used to evoke a deity or the supernatural. Mutton is basically the meat from sheep, but also when men have those big sideburns that come down on their face. That's called mutton chop sideburns. It's a kind of beard style. Escutcheon is a shield, and chevron is an ancient symbol which appears as a V shape. It's also the name and symbol for an American gas and oil company called Chevron. Rosary P references another kind of prayer, basically the Catholic rosary. But there's a much bigger definition, plant description for rosary P and castor bean, which often get mixed up. They're both on the United States terrorism list because they can make abrin and, just slipped my name, one other bioterrorism powder from those plants, from those seeds. Body odor is basically like smelly perspiration, and benediction is what is said at the end of a church service. It's the bestowing of a blessing. And all the good they do. That's just total casual slang. In the US, one often says to someone in a terrible situation, our hopes and prayers are with you. But it's really just a wimpy and useless response. It's kind of just hand wringing, shall we say, which gets back to the twining hands. So that kind of breaks down the titles right there. But I guess, where do I start here? Let's see, the diamond shapes for each of these are based on modern American color field painting. In this case, specifically, Kenneth Noland, who, fun fact, was the father of Katie Noland. Both drawings see the effect of obsolescence and aging. As a society, when I say society, I'm thinking Western canon, especially in the United States. As a society, we are in a moment of upheaval, grappling with such obsolescence, this obsolescence and decay. All of this work, which is pretty much at your gallery, all of this work are ruminations on masculinity, capitalism, whiteness, and their inherent toxicities. All of these kind of random thinkings are overlaid in these drawings. Ideas kind of merge together, and in my mind, life reemerges. You see unruly, poisonous flowers which twine into these conglomerative drawings. Such flowers can induce release, relief, liberation, and of course symbolize new growth. The majority of these plants are all wild plants that are really available anywhere. I just found Jimson weed growing on the bike path on the way to the studio. Understanding these plants can help empower us. They can also offer us self-protection. Of course, within the art context, they do that probably more symbolically. Within that, within those thoughts, then there's also a constant reconsideration or nod to the idea of Christian evangelism. I mean, frankly, Christian evangelism is what brought Donald Trump to the White House. It's, you know, I started integrating bits and pieces concerning evangelism in the mid 2000s. So we had just experienced 9/11, and there was a lot of discrimination here in the States against people of the Muslim faith, because it was, of course, wrongly assumed that every single person who practiced Islam was a terrorist. And from my standpoint, I find any kind of religious evangelism verging on terrorism. And I was kind of taking the standpoint of like, we have plenty of this here now. And now that we've had 4 years of Donald Trump, and we've seen what kowtowing to the Christian evangelists has brought us, basically a resurgence of white supremacism, it's like, yes, it is terrorism. In fact, the white supremacists are the most dangerous terrorist threat in the United States at the moment. Anyway, kind of got off the track there. Oh, I know, castor bean. It's ricin. Ricin comes from castor bean, and abrin comes from rosary pea, and both are considered bioterrorism agents. I'm going to leave you with all of that mess of ideas around those drawings, but maybe there's a few entrance ways that were opened up for people through that.